Perfect. So that's me. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. And for FintechTO and RBC, thank you for having me, as well as TransferWise up here to present. So one of the topics, especially coming from my background, that I thought would be interesting to talk about is really the idea of growth and taking a company from one market to multiple markets around the world. And we wrap that up under this title, The Scaling of Borderless Money. So before I begin, how many people here have heard of TransferWise? All right, a good amount. And how many people here know where Estonia is? Oh, an even better amount. This is great. Normally the Americans, when I do that, there's only like one or two hands. So you guys are already ahead of the curve. So these are our two founders, if it pops back up on the big screen, Christo and Tabit. And they had a bit of a problem. So they were both in London, but one was earning in sterling and the other one in euro. But they had obligations in the opposite currency. So they had spent a lot of their time and money, as it turns out, wiring funds back and forth between the two currency zones. And they noticed a couple things. The first was that it was incredibly slow. The second was that they were never really sure what the foreign exchange rate was going to be. And the third was that it was also expensive and non-transparent. So not only were the fees non-transparent, but they never really knew who was handling their money. So they said, hey, this is an actual problem, and they set out to solve it. What they realized is that they each had accounts in the local currencies. So they began trading back and forth between themselves at an agreed upon FX rate, which in this case was the mid-market rate. And they noticed a couple things. One, they knew exactly what that rate was. Then they also knew exactly what those fees were because they were using the local payment rails. And the local payment rails were not only cheap, but they were fast, and that offered them complete transparency about who those banks actually were that were handling their money. And they began just doing this back and forth between themselves. And they said, you know, we can't possibly be the only people in the world that have this problem. And it turns out that they were right. So here's a brief little timeline of our company. And you can see that in 6 years, we're now moving over 2 billion a month. And we've gone from 2 employees to 1,200 employees, and now to 3 million customers around the world. So it's quite a big trip, actually, for a company in just 6 years, and it's something that we're incredibly proud of. As you can see, those employees are also in 9 countries. So not only have we opened up around the world in terms of over 70 countries and over 40 different currencies, but we've also opened up offices all over the world as well. So I think the very first thing to think about when you think about growth and scaling is actually on the product piece. And we had a very good presentation just now sort of about the development of product. And our product began with that fundamental problem, and it was a real world problem that was applicable to more than just our founders. So this is a really cool graphic, I think, that really shows the difference then between TransferWise and what someone would get from a sort of typical bank. And I realize I'm standing in front of a huge RBC poster as I say that. Apologies for being in this space and saying that. But you can see the difference, and it's something that we do like to talk about. So, you know, why it really works is we are looking then at modern costs. So with TransferWise, we're not dealing with a lot of legacy technology. We've invested in-house and built out our own treasury management systems to enable us to sort of build our own banking network with our local banking partners around the world. So that automatically drops the price. We're also then covered globally. So very often when someone is looking to send or receive money, it's not just from one other currency. Instead, especially in an SMB scenario or with freelancers, they have an incredibly wide vision. So they're looking at markets all over the world, and they want to have that flexibility within their product. And that leads us to this idea of borderless. So TransferWise has a vision that eventually moving funds should be free, and it should not have any borders. And this is something that we're actually trying to build in our current product. And just a bit of detail on that. Currently, we're offering local routing details in 4 currencies, which then turns into a stored value that you can hold as a customer in over 40 currencies. And then we're in the process of launching a physical card, so a debit card or a prepaid card, depending on the market, for you to actually access that currency in real life situations, so point of sale or an ATM, ABM. And again, all of this is sort of built out in the sense to figure out what is the best product possible for our customers, and how does that product then resonate around the world. And that brings us to taking it global, and I just wanted to sort of abstract a little bit and talk about why we think it is that this is actually sort of the way to think about solving a global product problem. So the first thing that we noticed in our journey was that we didn't need to reinvent the wheel. And a lot of companies spend a lot of time thinking about clever ways to do things. Some of them are clever and some of them aren't. What we found is that we're using an existing infrastructure to solve our problem. We didn't have to build anything from scratch, and we didn't have to fight for it necessarily through compliance or regulatory challenges. Instead, we're using our local bank accounts, and that allows us then sort of this idea of mass payouts for a cheaper and faster service. So for those of you who are here starting up your company, I think the first bit of advice I'd say in thinking about scaling and taking it global is think about what already exists, and then think about ways that you could actually use that and leverage it to make your own product better, faster, whatever your metric happens to be. The next thing that we've noticed on this 6-year journey is that it really does matter who you work with. So I've talked a little bit about our local banking networks, and it has made such a difference to us who we chose to partner with. Our partners bring new technology to us, and they also then open up new markets for us. One Canadian partner, actually, that I'm quite excited about is Flinks. Flinks is a provider that we just onboarded recently, but they help us out with our bank account verification or validation here in Canada. And that partner has then enabled us to actually reduce costs, because we know sooner if those are actually good funds and if they'll arrive to us, so customers paying TransferWise for their transfer. And I'd say, as you're thinking about building, and these 2 points, you need to, the second point here, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but you do need to balance them. So when you think about these 2 points, really think about what are the vendors that you can bring into your process, if you need to bring vendors in, that are actually going to add value to your service, and what that value is, and can it extend beyond one single market or one single sort of feature or funnel. And that brings us then to this third point, which is thinking about how to develop in-house to cut costs. And this is sort of at odds with what I just was talking about. But one of the successes that TransferWise has had has been that we've developed everything internally. So one of the challenges that a lot of sort of traditional banking partners have is that treasury management is external. So if you think about some PSPs, it can be a bit difficult because they don't know where their money is. They don't know who's handling it. Because we own everything internally, we do, and that actually helps us save costs as well because it's newer technology. And I just have less than 1 minute left, so I'm going to breeze through this rest. But the last is just think about the larger picture. So with TransferWise, again, we started off inherently international, and I would encourage everyone here to think in the same vision. This has enabled us to build products that not only span the world, but attract large-scale partners like BPCE, the second largest bank in France, who has officially launched with TransferWise, so that TransferWise is powering their retail banking experience for anyone that wants to send money overseas. And then quickly, how Canada fits into this. So we're going to hear a lot about this, I think, later, hopefully, with Payments Canada. But Canada is a great place to think about sort of growing and scaling internationally. So they're making their payment system modern, which is already heaps ahead of the US, so congratulations there. They're also then considering direct access to payment systems. We were one of the first banks to have direct access to a settlement account at Bank of England, first non-bank. And that also enabled us to be a direct participant in the faster payment service. Canada's work in equaling the playing field between banks and PSPs or other fintechs is incredibly encouraging, and everyone in this room should be thankful for that. The last points there are that, as we already heard, Canada is a great environment for hiring tech talent. And as well, the Big Five, the established banks here, even though they are established and represent the majority of financial transactions, they're also eager for innovation, even RBC. And it's now a really good opportunity for you to be in fintech and to partner with some of these larger banks, not only for your own treasury purposes, but to figure out how you can grow your own market. And I think I'm now officially out of time. So I think that there are 3 minutes for Q&A.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne. I want to ask about the recent Walmart and MoneyGram partnership and how you guys are responding to that as a company.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So one of the things, especially when you're thinking about product, I'd say, is it's important to understand what's going on in the market and what your competitors might be doing, but not to spend so much time thinking about them that you lose sight of building out your own product and your own vision. So for us as a company, the TransferWise vision, as it began, was something that was really related around digital. So from bank account to bank account, traceable end to end. That lowers our risk profile generally. And I touched a bit on direct access, and why risk profile is important is that in the majority of markets around the world, fintech companies like TransferWise and perhaps even like your own, do rely on an originating bank to connect you to financial services that you need for your business to actually operate and to continue. So having a lower risk profile is incredibly important. With a partnership like MoneyGram and Walmart, it can actually extend beyond just account to account and venture on sort of accepting cash. And when you think about cross-border payments and remittance payments, which might be the primary use case of that partnership, that then elevates your risk profile. So for us, focusing on the digital aspect, again, account to account, is what TransferWise is doing right now. So I think it's a very interesting partnership, and I'm curious to see where it goes, but it's nothing that has me shaking in my shoes, let's say.
I go on.
Hey there. So is it due to regulation that maybe the reason why a company like yourself wouldn't use cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin to transfer these types of transactions?
Of course, you would ask after crypto. There's no explicit regulation about why we might stay away from that, but I can speak about my personal experience dealing with some of our banking partners. And obviously, when people think about crypto, the very first thing they think about at the moment is Bitcoin and a bit of the rough history that Bitcoin has had in the past and some of its colored history, I'd say. And again, to go back to a risk profile point of view, that does then sort of increase your risk profile. So a lot of originating banks are still a couple years behind the time in how they think about things, what they understand, what technologies they use and can digest. And when a financial institution like a TransferWise, for example, or like a money transfer service is introducing crypto into the fold, that would immediately raise eyebrows and raise your risk profile. So for us, we found that it's not something that we're pursuing currently. Our partnership banks would obviously have a lot of questions about what that means. How is our diligence process over someone sending crypto in, for example? Where did that come from? And that's something that I think the industry is still trying to answer, and I don't think that they've quite figured it out yet. I do think, personally, this is me speaking, not TransferWise, I do think that there is probably a future for crypto, especially in these transactions, but I think that we're still a little ways off from that.
I have a question over here. In the back, here.
Oh.
Hi, it's Louis. I'm just curious as to how you're dealing with GDPR.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not a privacy expert, unfortunately. So I would recommend that you go to LinkedIn afterwards and find me, and I can direct you to that person. I'm also wearing a blue blazer like everyone else. If I had known, I would not have packed this morning. But I think broadly speaking, GDPR is something that's a challenge for a lot of tech companies in terms of figuring out how to overhaul some of their existing privacy and sort of fold in the new controls that a consumer has over their own data. As a consumer, I think it's generally a great thing and a move in the right direction. And I do think that we will see other markets begin to mirror that. California has recently introduced, and I don't know if anyone here cares about the US all that much, but California has introduced some legislation that has some echoes of GDPR, which I think is interesting and, dare I say, exciting.